show to remember. Take over, time to flow you down. Take over, nothing's gonna be the way my life was over. When you started with us, you should have thought twice. Walk something ice, the game's over. It's time to flow you down.
Hey, what's up everyone, Ultimatomic HD here, and welcome to the third episode of School of OTK. In today's episode, we'll be finishing off with the monster cards by taking a look at the second half of the monster cards, those being extra deck monsters, the second big division of all monster cards across the game. Now, extra deck monsters, unlike main deck monsters, reside in the so-called extra deck. And now, the extra deck you do not need to have in order to actually play the game. You can completely play the game without the extra deck, as it's a completely optional. But if you do decide to have an extra deck, which most decks tend to have extra decks when they are playing, the number of cards in the extra deck must not exceed 15. So you can only have 15 cards in the extra deck max. And the only thing that is allowed in the extra deck are, well, extra deck monsters. So let's take a look at them one by one, starting with the very first type of extra deck monster introduced in the game, those being fusion monsters. Fusion monsters were the only extra deck monster type in the game for a long time, and they were introduced alongside the game itself, since it was the only extra deck summoning type. The extra deck back then was called the fusion deck, but when the second extra deck summoning type got introduced, the name was changed to extra deck as we know now. Now, fusion monsters are interesting because you get them by fusing, as the name implies, two specific monsters, or two or more specific monsters, where the summoning condition of each fusion monster has the requirements listed in its effect text, by using a specific card known as polymerization. Now, this is a retrain of the card, which is something I will get into later. But yes, in most cases, and in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, you needed two or more monsters which meet the summoning quota of the fusion monster you want to summon, along with this card right here, in order to summon the process, to complete the summoning process and summon the monster. Of course, this is a fusion summon, and fusion summoning and any other extra deck summoning method counts as a special summon, which is something I've discussed in the previous episode. Now, nowadays, you usually do not see the regular polymerization being used all that much, because archetypes, that would be cards which are tied together thematically and by gameplay style, usually have their own archetypal cards that allow you to summon fusion monsters without needing you to rely on polymerization, because utilizing polymerization most of the time is very slow from a meta standpoint, and not to mention that the original polymerization has several retrains, so there's absolutely no need to run the original polymerization most of the time, much like with this card right here, which is called Fusion Substitute, which has the exact same effect as polymerization, allowing you to summon fusion monsters, but with one minor inconvenience, and that is that you are not allowed to use monsters from your hand as fusion materials, which was kind of a very big striking point for polymerization. However, in return, this card has a graveyard effect, which allows you to banish it in order to reset a fusion monster back into your extra deck and then draw one card, which is actually a much better effect and makes the whole not being able to summon by using fusion materials from your hand worth it. So yeah, now the fusion monsters can either require two very specific monsters or two or more specific monsters in order to be summoned, or they can be more open-minded and generic and just allow you to use monsters that fall under a specific type. For example, my buddy old pal here, Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, requires two dark monsters on the field except tokens. Now, what are tokens? We'll get to that at the end of this video. So as long as you have 2 dark monsters on the field, you can use the polymerization, for example, to send them to the graveyard in order to fusion summon Starving Venom Fusion Dragon or any fusion monster that requires 2 dark monsters or 2 dark monsters on the field. And that is pretty much the gist on how you summon fusion monsters. Now, there are a lot of cards which allow you to summon fusion monsters in a lot of different ways, and like I said, polymerization has become very outdated and slow due to the release of plethora of other cards which even work generically, just like polymerization, and offer better results. So if you're playing a fusion-based build, feel free to research this a bit before you get started to see what actually gives you the best results. Now, some monsters can even fuse without fusion cards by simply sending them from the field or hand to the graveyard, but those situations are on the rarer side or tied to specific sets of cards or archetypes, which is actually a very good segue for the next summoning mechanic that was introduced, Synchro Summoning, my personal favorite summoning category. And yes, Synchro Monsters have the white card frame as opposed to Fusion Monsters who are purple. So Synchro Monsters are summoned in a following manner. Now, you remember in the previous episode how I mentioned tuner monsters, but I did not expand upon them because I want to talk about them here when I talk about Synchro Monsters, because the tuner monsters are the only way you can summon Synchro Monsters. So if you're playing Synchro Monsters, you must play some tuner monsters in your main deck as well. Because Synchro Monsters are summoned most of the time. This is just a generic example I'm giving, by having one tuner monster and one or more non-tuner monster, and you simply add up the levels of the tuner and the non-tuner monsters in order to summon a Synchro monster of the level whose sum equals the result. So, for example, if you have a level 1 tuner monster and a level 7 non-tuner monster, you can synchro summon a level 8 Synchro Monster by sending these to the graveyard. Now, there are some cards which, some Synchro Monsters which require a bit more different summoning procedures, maybe like a specific tuner or non-tuner, or more non-tuners than like one tuner and two or more non-tuner monsters, or some don't even require non-tuners, for example, or some require multiple tuners. Now, these are some very niche specifics that I'm listing and throwing out there. And usually, like Fusion Monsters, the Synchro Monsters will have their summoning requirements listed in their card text before the actual effect of the card even starts. So you should be pretty much covered there. And now this leads me to the next summoning mechanic which was introduced, those being Xyz Monsters. Xyz Monsters have this black card frame here, and they have their stars on the opposite side as opposed to the usual effect monsters that we've seen so far. And that is because Xyz Monsters have a noticeable difference between all the other monsters we've seen so far, and that is that Xyz Monsters do not have levels. Instead, they have ranks. And you summon Xyz Monsters by using 2 monsters of the exact same level, and then simply stack them on top each other and summon the Xyz Monsters on top of them. Now, unlike all the other summoning mechanics we've covered, like Fusion and Synchro, the material monsters do not go to the graveyard just yet. You use them like this in order to summon the Xyz Monster, and the remaining monsters, the ones you've stacked below the Xyz Monsters, are called Xyz Materials or Overlay Units, as they call them in the anime. And these overlay units are usually what you need in order to simply activate the effects of Xyz Monsters. So the initial idea of Xyz Monsters were that it's a bit of an easier way to access Synchro Monsters, which were a bit tricky back then because you needed a specific monster type and you need to do some level calculations before you can actually get to summon them, but in return you get very powerful effects. Now with the Xyz monsters, this was basically made as you get these powerful effects more easily, but you can only use them a limited number of times, something that has been dying out of the game slowly but surely, because most of the Xyz monsters now don't need the Xyz materials to utilize most of their effects. So that is something that's beginning to see prominence. Now, when using an Xyz monster's Xyz materials and sending it to the graveyard, this will not, in most of the cases, activate the monster's graveyard effects in order to do something, because it's not being treated as being sent to the graveyard. So this is something I might elaborate on in a further episode, because I think it feels more appropriate to talk about it there and then, rather than talking about it now. And just like regular monsters, I should have mentioned this earlier, Xyz monsters ranks range from 1 to 12, just like the regular monsters. And now this leads us to the very last summoning mechanic, those being link monsters, the newest summoning mechanic introduced into the game. And just like Xyz monsters, link monsters do not have levels, first of all, and most notably, you've seen these little arrows around the card. These arrows are called link ratings, and link ratings can go from 1 to 8 in theory. I say in theory because to this day there does not exist a link monster with a link rating of 8 and 7. The highest we've gotten is a link 6 monster. And the way you summon a link monster is by sending monsters to the graveyard equal to the link rating of the link monster you want to summon, and summon the link monster into the extra monster zone. Yes, I said extra monster zone. Because link monsters, unlike all these other 3 extra deck monster summoning types, must be summoned in the extra monster zone or a main monster zone that another link monster is pointing to. Now this is the main purpose of these link arrows. But before I get more deeper into that, link monsters can also be summoned in the following summoning procedure, as long as you follow the basic requirement for a link monster, because just like Fusion, Xyz, and Synchro Monsters, link monsters also have their own summoning procedure along with the generic way of summoning the monster. For example, Blackluster Soldier of Chaos has a summoning condition of 3 monsters with different names. And yeah, as long as you have 3 monsters and all 3 of them have different names, you can summon Blackluster Soldier of Chaos. But some of the other ones have slightly more better summoning conditions, such as Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess here, who requires 2 or more monsters with different names except tokens. Now, for example, if you wanted to summon a Link 4 monster, for example, I will say here Firewall Dragon. See here, he has the easiest summoning condition out of all I've mentioned so far, which is just any 2 or more monsters. So, for example, you can summon him in A, just having 4 monsters sent to the graveyard and then summoning Firewall Dragon, or B, you can use 2 monsters along with a link monster whose link rating is 2, because link ratings can be used to substitute for the monsters you do not have. This is another example of that balancing I have explained when I was talking about Synchro and Xyz monsters, because Link monsters are by far the costliest monsters you can summon in this game. It has the steepest cost in actually to go into them, so they made summoning them with multiple Link monsters easier by having these Link ratings act as the substitute monster. So you can send a Link 2 monster and 2 other monsters to the graveyard in order to successfully summon a Link 4 monster. Firewall Dragon here, for example. Or you can use 2 Link 2 rating monsters in order to go into Firewall Dragon, or you can use a Link 3 monster and just any monster really to go into a Link 4 Firewall Dragon. So as long as you pay attention to the basic requirements of each individual Link monster and observe how you can save up on using resources with the Link rating mechanic, you should have no problem mastering the Link monster summoning mechanics. Now, when it comes to actually summoning Link monsters and, Pendulum monsters, I should say, because this is something I also said I would follow up on when I get to the extra deck summoning mechanics. For instance, if you have a Link monster in the extra monster zone, in this case it would be pointing to 2 of your zones and 1 of your opponent's zones. When you pendulum summon or summon Link monsters, you must summon it into one of the zones the Link monster is pointing to, and this also holds for the opponent, true for the opponent as well, because the opponent can either use the unused extra monster zone as per the basic game's rulings, or he can summon his extra deck monster or Link monster into the zone that your Link monster is pointing to. So this is something else that you have to keep an eye out. And the same holds true for pendulum monsters when you're summoning them. When you're summoning the pendulum monsters that are face up in the extra deck, those monsters need to be summoned in the extra monster zone into one of the arrows that the Link monster is pointing to. So now with that other bit of context that I promised, I hope that pendulum summoning thing is a bit more clearer now from episode 2. And this pretty much is it when it comes to pendulum monsters in interacting with the other extra deck summoning mechanics. And also, I should note one more thing that I actually popped into mind. When pendulum monsters are used as Xyz materials to summon an Xyz monster, when they are detached from an Xyz monster in order to activate its effect, or if they're detached by your opponent doing something with it, they will not go face up in the extra deck, they will go to the graveyard like any other normal monster. So that is something else you have to keep an eye out. And last but not least, in order to finish up with the Link monsters, is something to elaborate on from episode 1, where I said that only one extra monster zone can be occupied by one single player, and that by only on a special circumstance can you use both extra monster zones at once. This process is called extra linking. Now, extra linking is a process when you... Okay, I'll use any Link monsters here for illustrative purposes, but I will explain along the way. In order to perform an extra link, you must summon Link monsters in a way that you basically co-link them. Now, the co-link is a mechanic where a Link monster's link arrow is pointing to another Link monster's arrow and vice versa. So, for example, let's do it like this actually. Now, Firewall Dragon is Firewall Dragon's left link arrow is pointing towards Firewall Dragon Dark Fluid, and so is Firewall Dragon Dark Fluid's right link arrow is pointing to Firewall Dragon, the regular one. Now that is basically a co-link, and you have to summon your link monsters in a way that they are basically co-linked with each other and make a pathway towards towards the other extra monster zone that you want to occupy. Then and only then can you summon another link monster into the extra monster zone. Now it absolutely needs to be a link monster. You cannot special summon another non-link monster from the extra deck into that extra monster zone. Or maybe you can. Now, on that part, I am not actually sure. I might do some research on this and post a comment on this on this video explaining this further after I do some research. But basically, this is the only way, as of this video that you can perform an extra link, because there are some link monsters with link arrows pointing diagonally left and diagonally right. So if you have a monster, for example, like Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, which is pointing diagonally down and right, diagonally left down and left right, you can, for example, have one of them here, have the center monster who is pointing towards this arrow and towards this arrow, and then have another Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos in the other extra monster zone, and to have an extra link with only 3 link monsters. And yeah, that would be very cost efficient, but so far it is way too complicated to do, rather than just focusing on having 5 link monsters in this composition here to complete your extra link. And I would say this pretty much does it for link monsters and extra deck monsters in general. So yeah, the last bit to talk about are uncategorized monsters, which are tokens. Tokens are monsters which do not reside in any deck, and they are summoned exclusively by monster effects which specifically mention that you special summon a token of some variety. Now these tokens have their type, attribute, effect, attack, defense points, and level determined by whatever card is summoning said token. And this is, for example, like a card that is specifically made to be a token. But you can literally use anything as a token, either a coin or a die, or a dice, or a piece of paper where you write down all the specifics of a token, like its stats, attack, defense, level, all that stuff. So yeah, these tokens, like I said, whenever a card or effect mentions that you summon a token, you basically follow whatever the card effect says for that token and summon the token in that way. And that pretty much does it for extra deck monsters, and somehow this video ended up being longer than the main deck video for some reason, so I have no idea how. But yeah, this is pretty much it when it comes to extra deck monsters. If there are still any questions to be answered, I will be sure to answer them, should anybody have any of them. And we are done with monsters. We're done officially with 1/3 of all the cards in the game, so that feels really accomplishing for me. And next time in the episode 4, we'll be talking about both spells and traps. So we'll be talking about the other 2/3 of all cards in the game. And I'm lumping them all together because they are all very similar in how they function. Because once I say everything about spells, basically about anything about traps is just 1 to 2 extra words longer, and just to differentiate them better, and the rest is pretty much all the same, and that's why I am lumping them all together. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Sorry for shaking the camera here. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my Patreon if you got the time. Sorry for the shaking the camera again. And I will see you in next time. See you all and have a good day. Peace.
You never see it coming.